right, joining us now to discuss the events is Dr. Adam Posen, president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Dr. Posen, you told us so. You told us this was coming.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
I know.
Thanks,
I know.
Janet.
So, I
Yeah,
mean,
it's. I
look,
mean, I mean, the markets are finally waking up that, for whatever reason, one has to just accept at face value. President Trump really believes in this agenda of tariffs. He was going to combine across the board and anti-China with sector by sector. Importantly, that it couldn't just be, as you and I've discussed, it couldn't just be negotiating, because once you start down this road, you're removing all the checks on uncertainty about trade that were there that the U.S. had put in place. And, the other thing is that neither he nor the Fed were going to react quickly to the stock market. And unfortunately, that's how things are going, and sets the table for exactly what you're describing.
so the Fed is said to meet today, but I wanted to read you a social media post by Donald Trump that he
Mm-hmm.
posted earlier. And it's oil prices are down, interest rates are down, the slow moving Fed should cut rates. Food prices are down. There is no inflation, and the long time abused USA is bringing in billions of dollars a week from the abusing countries on tariffs that are already in place. This is despite the fact that the biggest abuser of them all, China, whose markets are crashing, just raised its tariffs by 34%. On and on and on. He goes on to say they've made enough for decades taking advantage of the good old USA. Our past, quote, leaders are to blame for allowing this and so much else to happen to our country. Make America great again. Make America great again. So that is his response to the
Yeah.
market sell off. He's essentially saying, well, but the little guy is benefiting from this because oil prices are down, interest rates are down. They're going to be able to afford a mortgage again. What do you make of this?
Well, there are very few things that are completely bad or completely good. So, yeah, if you cause a recession and if you cause a expectation that profits are going to be down, demand is going to be down, then yeah, interest rates come down and oil prices and other commodity prices come down. So that's not to deny those things are happening. It's just when they're happening because the world is expecting a contraction, probably the net benefit isn't very great. I'm sort of doing gallows humor here, but I'm just trying to be factual. I think talking about the little guy when you're going to be, according to Yale Budget Lab estimates, you're going to be costing the average American household now $3,200 a year in through the tariffs. Peterson Institute's own estimates are lower than that, but around $1,500 a year. So if it's anywhere in between that, that's real money for the little guy. Yeah, I think he can argue that the stock market collapse isn't about his voters in the end, that most of the stocks are held by higher income people. But that doesn't justify it because all you're doing is destroying capital, as other people have observed on social media. None of this is going into the pockets of the so-called little people. It's just destroying the value of various U.S. and global firms.
I've been really focused on the destruction of capital in equity markets, but it's potentially harming job creation. It's
Oh,
stymieing
absolutely.
business formation. It's stymieing trade.
Absolutely.
I wonder how and when
Absolutely.
we can start measuring these things, right? When are we going to start getting any leading indicators to suggest to us what this is doing in real time to the fundamental economy?
Yeah, and to be fair to macro forecasters and the Fed, myself included, it's still got to be speculation for the moment because it's such a major abrupt shift. It's what we call a regime shift, meaning the basic assumptions of the situation have changed. And this is a fair criticism. Economic models are not great when shifting regimes. They're not great at the interaction between the micro and the macro. So we are going to start seeing evidence of this in coming weeks. It is going to show up in, as you and I have discussed, and you've discussed with many of your other regular guests, in the move from it being the so-called soft data, the expectations, the sentiment data, to it being the hard data. And I do think it's possible, going back to what you've quoted the president as saying on social media, that there are going to be some offsetting effects. There is a lower mortgage rate. There is a lower gas price. and probably within 8 weeks there's going to be very large tax cuts. So there will be some offsetting effects. We may get out of this without huge job loss, but only if there's huge tax cuts, which create their own problems and which then are basically undercutting what's supposed to be one of the biggest reasons for undertaking this whole program, getting the U.S. on a more sustainable path. So, but in terms of we're going to be publishing a new simulation for the Peterson Institute, which tries to project the damage this does. We hope by the end of the week. Others will be coming out. Goldman Sachs just updated. Again, if you just do the straight-up modeling, you end up with not that big a change. You end up with slow but positive growth through the end of the year, which might happen. But in reality, most of us think it's two-thirds plus likely that you're going to get a recession, meaning 2 or more quarters, calendar quarters of rising unemployment and or contracting GDP. But we're not going to see it, and the Fed's not going to react to it for a few months.
All right, so you've talked about a couple of scenarios in which we could get out of this. I mean, the one is direct government deficit expansions, which, as you say, sort of negates the point of this, or at least one of the points, right? Because I think the administration has made several arguments as to why tariffs are necessary. One of them is to reduce our deficit. And the other you mentioned is Congress stepping in. And I've been hearing increasing mention of Congress, also of lawsuits that argue that the president overstepped his legal authority in implementing these tariffs. How do you gauge these two scenarios and their likelihood? How likely is it that we're going to have Congress, the court step in, versus just the deficit expansions, which seem to be the much more straightforward and easy way to resolve this?
Yeah, I think you're right, Jan. I think the deficit expansion, I mean, we were already on course that you were going to get a renewal extension of the 2017 tax cuts, and then the Senate package, which passed a couple days ago, which isn't the final package, but I mean their iteration, was putting in an additional, I think, $1.5 trillion for cuts on tipped income, cuts on Social Security income, and there was always this magic asterisk type hole in the House and the Senate resolutions, not just the amounts of budget cuts, but spending cuts, but that there would be revenue from tariffs, that there would be revenue from growth. So, I mean, in the end, it seems very likely you're going to end up with even bigger deficits than are projected because the growth is going to come in lower. You're not going to get as much revenue. And then they may add on some temporary things, emergency measures. I think that's the way out. As you just said, I think it undercuts one of the main, not the only, but one of the main reasons for doing this whole exercise. And it, more importantly, causes long-term problems. But I think that's how, if we get out of a recession or avoid a recession, that's the main way. Congress and the courts, I'm not a lawyer, but it is very clear that the Congress under Trump 1, under Biden, and now under Trump 2, has let the president repeatedly put in place so-called emergency measures to put on tariffs. And they are set to have expiration dates. They're set to be reviewed by Congress and without congressional approval to go away. But that was never enforced over the last 9 years. And so legally, Congress can step up and just take it back. And we saw this bill by Senators Kaine and Rand Paul on the Canada tariffs. But even then, it was only a symbolic bill. It was a resolution. It wasn't, well, it would have been within Congress's rights to pass a bill saying, turn this around. The courts are the more, of course, rapid way to do this. If Congress is reluctant, they can essentially force Congress to take it back, force the president to back off. But right now, there's only one case filed so far as I'm aware, and we're trying to monitor this very closely. You might want to read my Peterson Institute colleagues Alan Wolf and Gary Huffbauer on PIE.com have been writing about this. There isn't yet a plaintiff. It seems like any member of Congress could be a plaintiff. It seems like any affected company could be a plaintiff. But right now, all we've got is a kind of weird specific plaintiff from Florida who may not get granted standing to sue. So courts are there, Congress are there, but ultimately, sorry to go on so long, ultimately it goes back to the fiscal excess, which I think is, like you said, Janet, going to be what gets us out of this.
Dr. Posen, thanks again for joining us. becomes kind of circular, right? We engage in this exercise to reduce deficits and end up potentially having to increase them. Tell us where we can follow you, Dr. Posen, and all of the research produced by the Peterson Institute.
Thank you for having me back, Jenna. It's a sad
Absolutely.
day, and we just want to try to help clarify and help your investors, your audience, make better decisions. You can find all our work at www.piae.com. I'm on X and LinkedIn and Blue Sky, and also Peterson Institute of International Economics, or PIIE, is also on X, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky.
And that's Dr. Adam Posen, president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics.